Welcome. My name is Mariana Garcia, and I am here with Oscar Gonzalez. And on behalf of the ADA National Network and the Spanish Language Outreach Project, we are introducing a new series of videos that aim to inform the Spanish-speaking community about the rights in the Americans with Disabilities Act. This presentation includes our fourth topic and main topic of this series, which is the ADA. So we will review what is the ADA, how is it structured, and we will use some scenarios to show how it applies in real life. Slide 2, disclaimer. The content of this video does not necessarily represent the views of NIGLR or ACL, and you should not assume endorsement by the federal government. So what are the objectives for this video? So the goal for this video include 3 main points. So we will provide an overview of the ADA. We will include some definitions, its structure, and general applications. Second, we will understand the concept of disability under the ADA. And third, we will review some examples to understand how the ADA applies to people with disabilities and the work of ADA regional centers to support people with disabilities. At the end, we will also review the role of community members in terms of the ADA, and we will discuss some recommendations from the national network. And finally, we will provide some resources for community members regarding the ADA. So now, Oscar will start explaining us what is the ADA and start this video.
Thank you, Mariana. So now, what is the ADA? As mentioned in the previous slide, the Americans with Disabilities Act, or ADA, is a federal civil rights law and was an act passed in 1990. This was a historic milestone because it was the first civil rights law focused on people with disabilities. The purpose of this law is to protect all people with disabilities from discrimination. It ensures people with disabilities can enjoy all aspects of society through equal opportunity and access to community programs and services. The ADA protects anyone with a disability in the United States, regardless of their qualities such as race, nation of origin, age, sex, religion, etc. Everyone is protected if they have a disability. It is also important to be clear about what the ADA is not. So the ADA is not special treatment for people with disabilities. The ADA also does not provide money or benefits. Slide number 5. And so where is the ADA in the legal system? The visual on this slide displays a pyramid that locates the ADA within the U.S. legal system. Its main purpose is to show the importance of the ADA and how this act, which is a federal law, protects people with disabilities across the United States. It is a civil rights law, meaning that it protects people with disabilities from discrimination and unfair treatment across different areas of life in the United States. We will now go into more detail about this law. Slide number 6. So this image, introduced in video number 2, shows a snapshot of some of the main laws that protect people with disabilities in the United States. It is common that people with disabilities in our community and their families get confused with all the legislation that protects their rights. This could happen because, as we can see from this graphic, more than one law can apply to the same area. This confusion can also come from different interpretations of disability in each law, different levels of implementation, so we're talking federal, state, and local, or other factors such as age that can play a role in application of the law. For example, in education, IDEA, 504, the Rehabilitation Act, and ADA all apply, but they do it in a different way and at certain points in a person's life. But how does the ADA intersect with these laws, and why are we covering this topic? One of the findings from the ADA National Network study was that participants were unclear about how the ADA connects to these other laws. As shown on the slide, the Americans with Disabilities Act applies in different areas of life, such as transportation, education, healthcare, employment, access to public places, and housing. This is because the ADA is a broad civil rights law that prohibits discrimination against people with disabilities in these areas of public life. On the next slide, we will explore these connections. Slide number 7. As we reviewed in video 2, some of the questions the National Network Regional Centers receive are related to specific topics and laws that protect people with disabilities. These questions can be related to housing, education, air, transportation, or healthcare. To understand the connection between the ADA and other laws, this visual shows that the ADA does cover aspects of some of those topics. However, it is not the only law. There are also many differences amongst these laws, and it can be complicated. It can be a complicated issue that is beyond the scope of this video. We will address these connections in a future video. And what we want to emphasize here is that the ADA protects people with disabilities in different areas of life, and you can contact your regional ADA National Network Center with any questions about how the ADA can intersect with these topics or laws. Slide number 8. And so, what is a disability under the ADA? As we learned in video 1, there are multiple different definitions of disability according to different laws and organizations. Here we can see the definition of disability according to the ADA. This is a legal definition and not a medical one. Under the ADA, there are 3 parts to the definition of disability. 1, a person with a disability is defined as someone with a physical or mental impairment that limits one or major life activities. 2, a person who has a record of such impairment, such as a person who has had cancer but is now cured or in remission. And 3, lastly, this could be someone who is regarded as having a disability but does not currently have a disability. For example, a person with burn scars who is not impaired in any way, but they are discriminated against because someone assumed they were impaired.
Slide 9.
Yeah.
Thank you, Oscar. Now let's talk a little bit more about some of the key concepts of the ADA and definitions of disability under the ADA. So for some people, the concept of a major life activity can be unclear. So the ADA uses the term major life activity to help define disability. A major life activity is a task that most people in the general population can perform with little to no difficulty. Some examples include working, speaking, self-care, hearing, breathing, walking, or learning. It is important to know that the Americans with Disabilities Act does not include people with temporary impairments such as a broken limb, concussion, or a common cold. So these impairments typically do not substantially limit a major life activity. So let's see, where does the ADA apply? Slide number 10. So as shown on this slide, the Americans with Disabilities Act is a broad law. It covers different aspects of public society to ensure everyone has equal opportunity. Some important areas the ADA covers include healthcare, education, public places, employment, community living, and transportation. We will review the structure of the ADA to better understand how this law applies across these areas. So the following slide will go over a short case to show how the ADA is applied in a real world setting. Slide number 11. So let's go back to Marta. So in general, one of the most common points of confusion is the concept of a service animal. Under the ADA, a service animal is defined as a service dog that has been individually trained to do work or perform tasks for an individual with a disability. This task performed by the dog must be directly related to the person's disability. So as we have reviewed in our example, Marta has a service dog and it is trained specifically to help detect changes in Marta's blood sugar levels and alert her before it becomes an emergency. So what does the ADA have to do with this? Under the ADA, service animals are allowed to enter different places in areas such as education, transportation, employment, healthcare settings, restaurants, and any other place that offers a service to the public, and in this particular example, to Marta. So even though there are different laws in education and transportation in these areas, the ADA allows Marta to enter healthcare facilities, her office, restaurants, transportation, and any other place where she needs to go. And we saw on video number 2 that she was discriminated because she wanted to bring her dog to the office, right? So as we can see here, the ADA protects Marta in one of these specific areas of life. So, as we said, the ADA covers different areas so Marta can fully participate in society. Now, let's look how these different areas are covered specifically by the ADA and how the ADA is structured. Slide 12. So, the Americans with Disabilities Act consists of 5 sections, also called titles. Title 1 covers everything related to employment. This means that people with disabilities are protected from discrimination in all stages of employment, and this includes hiring, training, payment, and reasonable accommodations at work. We will talk about this in a few seconds. Under Title II, people with disabilities have an equal right to participate in and benefit from any service provided by the state or local government. Some examples include registering for voting, attending a public university, or accessing the environment such as the local sidewalk. Title III covers everything that has to do with businesses that offers a service to the public. These include restaurants, hotels, theaters, museums, banks, parks, private schools, or daycare centers. Individuals with disabilities should be given equal opportunity to participate in and benefit from these services. Title IV and Title V broadly relate to communication and public announcements. So, it is important to remember that the ADA is a very broad law. And with this video, what we want to do is to raise awareness of this law and provide a basic understanding of it. It is impossible for us to cover every detail of this law, which is why we invite you and the people who are listening to this video to leave your question at the end of this video or contact your regional center if you have additional questions about this video or the information we are providing. So, with that being said, let's go to Title I, and Oscar will provide some key information about Title I.
Slide 13. Thank you, Mariana. So now we're going to talk a little bit more about Title I and employment. Title I of the ADA prohibits discrimination on the basis of disability in recruiting, hiring, promotion, training, pay, and other aspects of employment. Employees with disabilities should have the same opportunity to be hired, promoted, paid, and trained as any other coworker. Disability discrimination occurs when an employer treats an employee or applicant unfavorably because of their disability. To prevent unfair treatment at the workplace, employees can request accommodations to perform their job functions. A reasonable accommodation is one key element of Title I. It is any change in the work environment or in the way things are usually done to help a person with a disability apply for a job, perform the duties of a job, or enjoy the benefits and privileges of employment. In order to request reasonable accommodations, the employee with a disability must demonstrate that they have a medical condition that is limiting their ability to perform a function of the job. Many times, this requires talking about disability or disclosing their disability, especially when it comes to invisible disabilities under the ADA. Under the ADA, employers cannot take any adverse action such as firing an employee, denying a promotion, or giving negative evaluations that are unsupported. Unfortunately, this happens frequently, but it is important to know that employees with disabilities have the right to ask for an accommodation, and receiving punishment for such requests is prohibited. One critical aspect of requesting accommodations is medical documentation. Employers may not ask medical or disability-related questions of job applicants before a job offer, but they can do it if there is a need to prove the need for an accommodation. And for more details, you can review the discussion of the ADA and reasonable accommodations at the EEOC's website. Slide number 14. So there are some considerations we do talk about when you disclose or talking about disability at work. As mentioned earlier, one of the reasons a person might need to talk about disability or disclose disability is to obtain accommodations at work. Therefore, this slide provides 4 concepts to consider about this topic. 1, disclosing a disability in the workplace can be done at any time, that is, during the hiring process, after getting a job, or at any point if someone anticipates barriers at work due to a disability. There is no need to disclose a disability in the workplace if it is not affecting your job performance. Number 2, it is confidential and nobody else besides the manager or human resource should be informed about the disability. 3, it is protected under the law, and disclosing disability is a requirement to receive an accommodation. And 4, is to be prepared with medical documentation that can support the reasonable accommodation request if asked. Slide number 15. All right, so now we will talk about an example. As we mentioned, Martha in previous videos. So Martha works at a medium-sized company, and she has been having trouble at work due to her anxiety. She has missed 3 days of work due to panic attacks, and she got a notice from her employer that she will be fired if she misses 1 more day. Her employer is not aware of Martha's anxiety, and Martha needs to request an accommodation that allows her to have a flexible schedule so she can better manage her anxiety and work optimally during hours where she has high alertness. Then we have slide number 16. And so that is the problem that we are having at work. And so what does Martha do? So Martha will call her ADA regional centers for support, and a ADA specialist will listen to her concern and offer some solutions to this issue. They give her the following suggestions. 1, she can ask for reasonable accommodations such as flexible work schedules, breaks during her hours of work, or a private space that reduces the triggers to her anxiety. 2, she needs to talk to her employer and explain she has anxiety and that is causing panic attacks lately. And this is also called disclosure, being able to let your employer know you do have a disability. 3, her employer might ask for medical documentation to support the request. And 4, the specialist also mentions that the written notice for missing days off work cannot be deleted, as the ADA only covers and offers protection from the moment the disability has been disclosed to the employer. And so Martha then followed the steps outlined by the ADA Regional Center specialist, and her employer was able to provide reasonable accommodations for her disability. Slide number 17. And so disclosure under the ADA. The example of Martha's panic attack shows the importance of disclosure process and protections under the ADA. Disclosures can be made at any time and allow persons with disabilities to request accommodations. They also protect persons with disabilities from retaliation or punishment based solely on the disclosure of a disability. And now Mariana will talk a little bit more about Title II, State and Local Services.
Slide 18. Thank you, Oscar. So let's talk a little bit about Title II. So this slide provides an overview of Title II of the ADA. And again, Title II requires state and local governments to give people with disabilities an equal opportunity to benefit from all their programs, services, and activities. There are some key concepts that are included in Title II. So the first one is public programs and services. These are activities, spaces, or events sponsored by governments in which the public participates. Examples of these include swimming lessons provided at a community center, sidewalks, building permits, driver's licensing. These are services and programs covered by the ADA. Another important concept within Title II is communication. Under the ADA, the state and local entities must make sure that people with communication disabilities can communicate with, receive information from, and convey information to the cover entity. This means that communication must be as clear and understandable to people with communication disabilities as it is for everybody else. Entities must provide support for communication such as information in large print, braille, audio recording of printing information, interpreters, real-time captioning, listening devices, screen readers, videos, and image description, note takers, and many others. Finally, another main concept included in Title II is transportation. Public transportation must be fully accessible for people with disabilities. This includes public buses, trains, stations, vans, and any other aspect of transportation. So for more details on Title II, you can review our website and the resources we will provide at the end of this video. And now we will move on into one of our case scenarios to see how Title II applies in practice. Slide 19. So let's go back to Lucas and let's remember um, Lucas is a 18-year-old. He has autism and his family migrated from Mexico 10 years ago. So if we remember, Lucas is not allowed to participate in soccer practices at the local park district programs in his neighborhood. He is great at soccer and had played with another team in the past. But when playing with the new park district team, he is having difficulty understanding and following instructions. According to the coach, he is not a team player. He is being discriminated against based on his disability because, as he said, he cannot be a team player and he has difficulties socializing and understanding the rules. So in this scenario, we already identify in video number 2 the discrimination. But in this video, we will talk about the ADA. So under the ADA, Lucas cannot be discriminated against, and he has the right to participate in this local program. The park district is required to provide alternative modes of communication to Lucas so he can understand the rules better and understand his role in the game. So what happened? So Lucas' mother calls her ADA regional center for support. And let's see what happens. Slide number 20. So when Lucas' mothers called the ADA regional center, an specialist of the ADA listened to her concern and he mentioned that number 1, under the ADA Title II, Lucas has the right to participate in soccer practices as the park district is part of local programs and services. It would be important to mention to the program manager that under Title II of the ADA, Lucas can request accommodations for an alternative mode of communications to be able to understand the rules and his role in the game. Lastly, accommodations for effective communication can include things like written instructions, additional training or recording materials, or any type of communication that commonly works for Lucas. So we also invite the audience to review additional resources in our website to complement the information in this video. And again, we will provide more information at the end. So so now Oscar is gonna talk about Title III and what does this mean for us?
Thank you, Mariana. And so Title III relates to the private sector or places of public accommodation. So this slide provides an overview of Title III under the ADA. Title III prohibits discrimination based on a disability in places and spaces that offer a service to the public. These services are offered by private businesses such as restaurants, hotels, theaters, doctor's office, pharmacies, retail stores, museums, libraries, parks, private schools, and daycare centers, amongst a few others. So some key ideas or concepts in Title III include access to goods and services. So that means that these private businesses should provide people with disabilities an equal opportunity to participate in programs, activities, benefits, and services offered to the public. For example, no person should be denied from attending a music concert because they are deaf or hard of hearing. An individual in a wheelchair cannot be excluded from an exercise class because they cannot perform all the exercises or receive the same results as those without disabilities. To do that, private entities should provide reasonable modifications to some of their policies. So, what is a reasonable modification? Reasonable modifications can be defined as any change in their policies, practices, or procedures that deny participation of people with disabilities in the services they provide. For example, a business can modify its pet policy to allow service dogs to enter with their owner with a disability. As reviewed earlier, service dogs have specific requirements in order to be covered under the ADA. By providing reasonable modification and access to goods and services, people with disabilities have an equal opportunity to participate in society. Slide number 22. And let's go over an example. So, Lucia is a 40-year-old woman who migrated 20 years ago from Peru. She has traumatic brain injury, and she is also a wheelchair user. Lucia enjoys theater, and she likes to go at least once a month. And Lucia recently moved to a different city and wanted to try a new theater with some friends. Given her traumatic brain injury, Lucia needs access to a space in the theater where the bright stage lights would not be shined onto her. However, when she went, she was told that the accommodations she needed were not possible that night, since the only accessible seating still available was in the front of the theater where the lights would be the brightest. Lucia felt she was being discriminated against, and she left the theater abruptly without asking many questions. And so, what steps does Lucia take next? The next day, one of Lucia's friends told her to get into contact with her regional ADA center. Slide number 23. And so, after Lucia calls her ADA regional center for support, ADA specialist, listens to Lucia's concern and mentions that one, private entities that offer service, including theaters, should provide accommodations for people with disabilities under Title III of the ADA. Two, Lucia should request the accommodation in advance. And three, some theaters have accessible performances, so she can always check with the event venue for a schedule of these performances. Four, some theaters may provide same-day accommodations, but it depends if the accommodation will be reasonable and not create undue hardship. Now, undue hardship is an action that requires significant difficulty or expense. These factors include the nature and cost of the accommodation in relation to the size, resource, nature, structure of the operation by the entity. And so that's just some examples of Title III. And so Mariana will talk a little bit more about Title IV and Title V next.
Thank you, Oscar. So the last two titles are not as common as Title 1, 2, and 3. Therefore, we will provide some key ideas, but we will not go in depth into these two slides. For Title 4, some of the key ideas include one, telecommunication relay services. Number two, closed captions must be provided by all federally funded entities. Title 4 requires that telephone companies provide telecommunication relay services that allow people with hearing and communication disabilities or non-voice users to communicate over the phone. This also means that any federally funded or partially funded must provide closed captions to all their public service announcements. For Title 5, some key ideas include prohibition of retaliation and coercion to make someone do something they might not want to do. Number two, state immunity. And number three, conditions that are not covered under the ADA. So Title V covers some topics that apply broadly to other titles. This can include the relationship between ADA and other laws, conditions that are not covered under the ADA, define explicit restrictions against retaliation or coercion against someone with a disability who exerts their civil rights. And as we mentioned, we don't really go in depth with these two titles, but if you have specific questions, please communicate with your regional ADA centers for more information on this. So let's talk about all these concepts that can be included in all four titles. Slide 25. As we have briefly mentioned throughout the presentation and maybe in the other videos, there are some concepts that can be covered by one or more titles. Here are four of the most common topics that ADA centers provide consultation on. Let's start with number one. So effective communication. We mentioned this in Title 2, but let's talk a little bit more. As mentioned, effective communication occurs when the person you are communicating with can clearly understand the information being shared. Entities under Title 2 and 3 should provide support to achieve effective communication. One of the ways in which this can happen is by providing auxiliary aids. So that's our second term, auxiliary aids. These are methods of delivering information so that people with different limitations can understand it. Examples of auxiliary aids are sign language interpreters, large print, braille, audio recording, among many others. Our third concept is service dogs. And service dogs are defined under the ADA as a dog that has been individually trained to do work or perform tasks for an individual with a disability. The task performed by the dog must be directly related to the person's disability. And before we mentioned the example of Martha, so this can happen across different areas. And finally, we have undue hardship. So Oscar briefly mentioned, but undue hardship is a defense when accommodations cannot be provided due to the cost or negative impact on the operation of an entity. It is a term that is used to describe when all accommodations cannot be met and if it is too expensive or requires a policy change that is deemed unreasonable. Undue hardship can apply for accommodations at the workplace in Title 1 or policy modifications in Title 2 and 3. And then remember, you can check more information in our resources or our website. And then finally, we will review our role as community members in relation to the ADA. Slide 26. So after reviewing the main topic of this video series, which is the ADA, the question is, what is your role in the community in relation to the ADA? So on this slide, as we've been doing with the other videos, we make recommendations for community members based on the testimony of many community members and evidence collected over the years about the lack of information in the community about the ADA. These can be small actions that can make a difference in our community. For example, for people with disabilities, it is important to know your rights under the ADA, where and when you are protected, and how rights allow you to participate in different areas of life. And again, the other aspect we encourage is to share information with those who are not receiving this information. For employers, it is important to know that their rights and responsibilities under the ADA. Under Title 1, it is important to understand the role in providing accommodations, but also what they can do to participate in a fair and just conversation that is effective for both parties. Also, promote an inclusive environment for people with disabilities by being open to listen to people's needs and addressing them under the law. In addition, it is critical to provide training to human resource personnel and other coworkers in terms of disability awareness and specific procedures that are covered under the ADA. And then finally, there are responsibilities for employers in terms of disability access. So now let's talk about family members. Family members have the responsibility to educate themselves and educate their children with disabilities about the ADA. Even though the ADA does not apply in some areas when children are younger, there are some connections with different laws, and it is relevant to understand these differences. Family is a very important part of our culture, and educating families is a priority for us as a national network. And we found that there is limited information and and education about rights and ADA for this specific group. So we invite you, family members and caregivers, to develop this basic knowledge and understand some of these laws and the ADA that will protect your children in the future. And we also want families to know that there are some limitations and boundaries with the laws, and it is important for you to educate your children so they can advocate for themselves when they are older and they have to do it themselves. So let's talk about service providers and professionals. And as we've mentioned before, you carry a big responsibility under the law because you provide services to our community with disabilities on a daily basis. From the National Network, we want to invite you to continue working on awareness of disability, to be prepared to interact and support this community, and to offer equity in service. To do that, we recommend that service providers and professionals review the rights and responsibilities under Title II and III of the ADA. It is important to understand um, how these actions under Title II and III in relation to physical access to spaces, effective communication, provision of auxiliary aids, modification of policies, reasonable accommodations, and many others. So we also recommend that service providers and professionals inform their clients and patients about the ADA and their rights. And finally, as a network, we encourage community members to promote disability in a positive way and move away from stereotypes. That is a good first step to understanding rights, laws, and regulations for the community with disabilities. Also, it is important that community members are informed about the ADA so they can provide accurate and reliable information to the members of the community. And then we invite you and we encourage you to be aware of which entities enforce the law and the regulations and know where to go, who to contact, and where to refer people. So overall, all community members are encouraged to reflect on their own knowledge about rights and responsibilities, what has been done at the local area of expertise, and what can be improved in order to provide an equal opportunity to people with disabilities across different areas of life. So this closes our topic on ADA. I'll pass it to Oscar, and he will give us some resources about the ADA and where to find more information and where to go if you have more questions.
Thank you, Mariana. And so, if you would like to learn more about the National Network and the Spanish Language Outreach Project from the National Network, please visit adata.org/SLO. You could also scan these QR codes to access the website information. Slide number 28. And as we end this video, we would ask if you could take a brief moment to provide feedback on this video and its content. Your comments will assist us in improving video content to make it the most useful for our community members. Slide number 29. And we're coming up on the next video series. The next video in this series will cover the role of community members as it relates to the ADA. And slide 30. And if you would like more information and resources for utilized in this video, please feel free to view the following references.